All right, guys. Just want to welcome you to the second day of AP Euro class. We're going to be discussing um, the the Peace of Paris that I had you look up, the Versailles Peace Treaty. You'll see that there is a lot that actually takes place through all of this. So we've gone through World War I. We've seen the salvation of Europe at the hands of the Americans as they come in and really turn the tide of the war because Germany was going to win. And what's interesting about the war, and something that you'll see Hitler take advantage of in World War II, is before the battles even started going back into Germany, the Allies forced the Germans to surrender. So they had them surrender in a train car outside of Paris, if I remember correctly, and they had them surrender there, sign the papers and whatnot. Well, Hitler would use that exact same train car to get the French to give up in World War II. And so it's kind of an interesting point of history. But the war is over, and in like late 1918, November 11th, yes, I did know that, Armistice Day, is when the armistice was signed to stop all of the fighting. And so come January 1919, you have a meeting of 5 countries to say that they're going to determine where this conference of peace is going to go. And so basically you have the United States, you have Britain, France, Italy, and oddly enough, Japan. Those 5 countries come together and they say that they are going to determine what's going to happen post World War I. And so as World War I comes to a close and they're trying to determine all these things, you do need to know the 5 people who are really in control. From France, you have Georges Clemenceau. From the United States, you have Woodrow Wilson. From Britain, you have David Lloyd George. From Italy, you have Vittorio Orlando. And from Japan, you have, make sure I pronounce this correctly, his name is Shinji Kimochi. You don't need to write that down. I'm not writing it on the board. Main reason being is Japan will actually get out of this whole process by March of 1919, saying that they really don't want to be involved with something that has nothing to do with them. Kind of like the Americans not wanting to be involved in the League of Nations, but we'll get there when we get there. And so those 5 come together and they say, okay, we're going to make this council that they're going to determine everything. And this council becomes known as the Council of 10. Because each of those men that I mentioned had like a helper who was with them. So that's 10 people altogether. And so these 10 people come along and they make all the policy and everything else. And then eventually it's the big 4, as it were. And these 4 people would make all the policy as Japan would pull out in March. Now, in February, they set up what's known as the Supreme Economic Council. So the Supreme Economic Council's main goal was to determine a lot of different things. Now, number 1 was to set up the League of Nations. Number 2, determine who was responsible for this war. 3, guarantee that it never happens again. 4, who's going to pay for the war? You know, if it's your fault, you should pay for it. Make those reparations. Number 5, they would also be responsible for making international labor legislation. Remember, one of the big ideas at this point in history is labor laws. How long should people be working? How old should they be before they work? How many hours? So on and so forth. And so they're going to be dealing with that. Also, international ports, who can use them. Waterways, railways, again, who can use them. Various questions of financial and economic sorts, naval and military matters, and then, of course, you're going to have something that we mentioned last time in the mandate system, and that's territorial questions. Who gets the land that the Germans had? Who gets the land that the Turks had? And those are the 2 main countries that will have their holdings kind of broken up. Not to say that they're the only ones, but they are the main ones. And so, lots of things going on here, but number 1 that you have to understand is that there are many treaties that are signed throughout this Paris Peace Conference. And they're signed with each individual country who was involved in the war. And so the first one you need to know is the Treaty of the League of Nations. This is the first thing that they did. And it would be signed on April 28th of that year. So on April 28th, you have the Treaty of the League of Nations signed, and everyone agrees, well, everyone except for Germany, who's not there, by the way, as the defeated people. They're not there to go through the negotiations or anything. And so League of Nations was approved April 28th, 1919. Woodrow Wilson is feeling really good about this. In fact, he fought really hard to make sure that this took place. And the person that he had to get help from to make this happen was Clemenceau. Clemenceau had really the most vocal, outgoing voice, and Clemenceau had one goal throughout this entire process, and that was to blame the entire war on the German people. Never mind that Austria-Hungary fought against them, Serbia, the Turks, whatever. Who cares that Bulgaria was involved? It's all the Germans' fault. They're the ones that instigated it. They're the ones that did everything, and so we're going to lay the blame on the Germans. So you see a rivalry that we've seen played out in AP Euro quite a bit between France and Germany kind of reach a culmination right here as they're laying everything at the feet. And so the only way that Woodrow Wilson could get Clemenceau to agree to the League of Nations is if he support him in laying the blame of everything at the feet of the Germans. Then you have the Treaty of Versailles, which is signed by the Germans, and it was given to them May 7th, and it would be signed by June 28th. And they would agree to repay all the money that they had cost, France. They agreed to repay any other war debts that might be out there, to take full responsibility for the war. Hey, it's all your fault, Germany. Forget your friends who helped you, but it's all on you. Then you have the Treaty of Neuilly. I'm pretty sure I just butchered that. But it's Neuilly, so it is what it is. And that was given to the Bulgarians. That was a treaty signed with them. And those are your main treaties. That's not to say there weren't others that were signed, but those are the four main treaties and things that the Peace of Paris, quote unquote, accomplished. And so the Germans kind of took the brunt of everything that's taking place here. And you've got to understand what that's going to do is that's going to completely tear down a people group. Remember last time we were talking, I reminded you about Karl Marx and how do you get socialism to come into a country? By destroying the economy. If you can destroy the economy, you can bring in socialism because the people will be desperate for anything that promises to change their life. And so, with that promise, you have these people coming in and saying, "Okay, here we go. We're gonna change things," and they're gonna make promises like, "Hey, we're gonna give you this, we're gonna give you that," and the people having nothing at this point will take it. There was some leading economists, my bad, at this time, who said that if you carry out this Treaty of Versailles and you get the Germans to sign it and take all the responsibility and make them pay back everything, and then also take land away from them, and on top of that, limit the size of their military down to like what's basically a third world country's military, take away their navy, take away everything, then what you're going to do is you're going to have another world war. Unfortunately, they couldn't have been more right. Clemenceau could never see beyond his hatred of the Germans and what happened during this time period. And at the same time, Woodrow Wilson couldn't see beyond getting his 14-point plan approved in the League of Nations. He kind of saw it as like his legacy. This will be the culmination of his entire political career if he can stop war in our time. Like I said, the Americans, he'll go home and he'll tell the Americans, and the Americans will say, no thank you. We don't want to be embroiled with England, with Europe, with any of that. Let them handle their stuff and we'll handle our stuff over here. And so all of that is important to note as we move through this whole section. And so Clemenceau is just angry, and he takes it out on the German people. Interesting fact about the Germans at this point is their money became literally pointless. Food was more valuable than any sort of money that they had. So in 1933, whenever Hitler comes to power, whenever he comes promising things like, we'll give you a car, everyone will have a car in Germany, or promises that the economy will get better if you'll, elect him and all these things. While he doesn't win the election, he does come in second and basically blackmails and or threatens the guy who wins to give him the power. The people are perfectly fine with it. They'll follow him. And by the way, the things that he does immediately changes the economy of the German Empire because he does one thing. Now, it's completely illegal by the Treaty of Versailles, but he does it. He immediately rebuilds the military. And whenever you're spending money on the military, money is going back into factories. People are getting jobs. And so they begin to stabilize. Also, he stops paying the war debt. But that's for whenever we get there. We don't have to discuss all of that exactly right now. So just understand that the Treaty of Versailles was probably the biggest failure out of all of this. Now, the League of Nations is a failure in and of itself because the point of it was to stop war. But obviously we have World War II. And then the United Nations is supposed to stop war. Look at that. Anyways, if you don't know what I'm talking about, they don't really stop war either. It's just a thing that they say that they're going to do, but never really actually make happen. One of the things that the Americans were kind of leery of is that even though the Japanese didn't really fight in the war too much, they actually were given claims to German holdings in China. And the U.S. and the British were not too excited about this. Because remember, the Japanese have been basically militarizing themselves since the, I can't ask you guys the question, so I'm just going to sit here and just remind you that, we talked about the last revolution, the Meiji Restoration, and since then they've been basically militarizing themselves, industrializing their country, and so they're ready to basically take over all of Asia. And by giving them land inside of China, you're going to really hurt the sovereignty of the Chinese people. And so that's really where the Japanese come in. And you see other divvying up of lands. And we already talked about how end of World War I, the Americans get, and the British and the French get all that oil in the Middle East, and they split that up amongst themselves. And then different countries get parts of Africa. Australia and Japan get parts of the Pacific and Asian nations. And so all of the holdings of Germany gone overnight with the Treaty of Versailles. And that's going to be the biggest problem that you run into with that. Now, the Russian Revolution, remember we were talking last time that it goes a little bit deeper than just like, hey, Lenin came in 1917 and next thing you know, the Bolsheviks, Reds versus Whites. By the way, the Reds are Lenin's followers. The Whites are everyone else. The two sides fight, and then by 1918, it's all said and done. No, the Bolshevik Revolution will carry on beyond World War I, and it's something that will affect Russia for some time. It won't finish until 1923. Lenin comes in. In 1918, they were able to kind of capture Nicholas II and his family, all of them. So for those of you that think maybe one of his family survived and went on to live a healthy life, I have bad news for you. The movie is not real and neither is the story. None of them survived. They were all killed gruesomely for the most part. And but that killing them didn't stop Lenin, and it also didn't stop the other side because both sides are vying for control of Russia at this point. So basically you have an all-out civil war that takes place with the Bolshevik Revolution. And so they come through and they fight all the way up until 1923, and by 1923 that's it. The Reds win, and Russia is forever changed from this point forward as they will be communist, and Lenin will set up the communist policies, and Lenin will pursue all of these ideas, and, well, Soviet Union is born, communism has a foothold in the world for the first time, and will lead us beyond World War II. The effects that it's going to cause is the Cold War, creation, the nuclear arms race. There's so many things that are affected by the start of communism in 1923, whenever they claimed victory over the White Army. And so make sure that you're keeping up with that document on causes and effects of everything that we're discussing. Next time, we're going to be looking beyond the Russian Revolution and the Versailles Conference, and we're going to kind of look at the economic crisis that started with the Great Depression in 1929. So that's exactly what you guys need to be looking up this time. We're just going to write global depression. Make sure you have the year. It's 1929. All right. You can find more than one global depression in history. Make sure you do this. And don't just look at it from the American side. It's going to be very easy to look this up and only find stuff on Americans. Make sure that you find stuff from around the world, Europe specifically, how Europe is affected during the Great Depression by the fall of the stock markets, and how that's really going to lead us. It's going to make things worse for Germany. It's going to make things worse for them and lead us closer and closer to the next World War. Until next time, we'll see you guys later.